Alright. Oh. Okay, we've jumped from August to November apparently, or September to November. We've jumped a month in the book. Okay. The next chapter is called The Long Days. November. The sky became a shroud of velvet grey. Snow fell steadily. The earth shivered. Television news and weather reports described it as the coldest autumn on record, while newspapers ran gloom-laden features on global warming and the greenhouse effect. Experts blamed the premature winter on an oscillating pattern of winds in the Arctic, driving frigid air from around the North Pole, south into the US and Europe. People muttered about an ice age coming. From his small house, warmed by special dragons, on a comfortable sofa with a cat by his side, David Rain followed every bulletin he could, anxiously remembering Dr. Bergstrom's warning about the effects of dragonfire in the northern stratosphere. But not once did the news carry any strange rumors of leathery winged creatures or new stars in the sky. No sign of Grockle, no hints of his death, one less worry in David's nerve-racked life. But there were other troubles. The day after he and Liz had talked about Arthur, he received 2 telephone calls. The first left him shaken and hollow with guilt. When he picked up, the caller had simply said, "David?" "Xana!" he exclaimed, dancing the cell phone around half a circle. He really had thought the voice was hers. "That is so sick," the woman said, and he knew that then the caller was his sister, Becky. "I thought you'd like to know we had a memorial service this morning. Some of Xana's friends turned up from college. Didn't see you among them." I didn't know," sputtered David. "Would he have gone if he had?" "They did," she said, bitter, remorseless. "Why couldn't you show your lousy face? You were all she ever talked about before that trip." I'm sorry," David said. What else could he say? Even though the lie was raking out his guts. "She's gone, and you didn't even send a card." David felt his breath coming through in stammers. "Becky, what do you want from me?" "She loved you more than life itself, and you—" Her voice broke into sobs. "Becky." There was a clunk. Then she hung up. Number unavailable. No contact required. Half an hour later, the X-Files ringtone was thrilling out of his phone again. Another female. Another problem. "David?" "Hi. It's Dilys Wotton." Dilys, his editor. David sank onto his bed. "Hi," he said. "You sound hoarse. Do you have a cold?" "No, it's just the winter. Just the winter. Just the weather." "Dreadful, isn't it? I've been working from home 3 days a week. How about you?" "Sorry? Are you working from home 3 days a week?" Okay, that's my poor attempt of subtlery. "How's the book going?" "Book?" She gave an incredulous laugh. "Polar bears! Arctic! You can't have forgotten with all this white stuff around." He stared at his laptop close on his desk. One giant slab of silicon gilt. "Hi there, Mushy Mushy. Hope you're doing well." On the windowsill. Yeah, book reading. Reading Firestar today. Well, we're trying to finish Firestar, but we'll see how far we can get. On the windowsill, Gazooks barely gave a twitch. He was at rest with his eyes gently closed, notepad and pencil held to his breast. Beside him was Gareth, squatting on his tail with his paws pressed together as if he was practicing a yoga position. Somewhere inside him, an alien being was recharging its batteries, much like the dragons all around the house. Shutting down for the winter, Liz had called it. A kind of waking hibernation. "Book? Yeah, it's going fine." "How exciting! Can you tell me anything about it? Give me a few more clues about the plot?" "I am still doing my research." "Oh, you writers," she laughed. Always cagey. What's your schedule then? It must be hard to write and fit college in as well." "I quit college, he said. Really? No, it was a lie, off the top of his head. But now he had thought of it, quitting felt like the right thing to do. Stay at home with Bonington, he stroked the cat's ears. Write, prepare, look after Liz. That's a bold move, David. I know, he said. His next statement was bolder still. I'll have the book finished by the end of January. Wow, she gasped. You can write that fast? David looked at Gazooks again. When I'm in the mood, he said. No, Liz said when he told her of his plans. You need an education. You mustn't quit. He took the peel off an orange and split the fruit apart. There's nothing there for me, Liz. I don't enjoy it, and I'm pretty sure Xana won't go back. I have a contract to write my book. College is just going to get in the way. I have enough money from Sneaker for my rent. Anyway, in 3 months' time, all my education lies in the north. David, my mind's made up. I'm leaving. Liz pushed her dinner plate aside. Bonington, keen to have the haddock she rejected, sat up on his hind legs, mewing like a kitten. There were tracks around his mouth where the dribbles had run. She dabbed the fur dry before feeding him some fish. You frighten me sometimes, she said to the tenant. Why did I ever draw you into this? You didn't. It was meant to be, he said. All of this pointing to one thing. Gawain. If Grockle isn't successful, and as far as I can tell, we have no way of knowing if he will ever find that peace. There is going to be some kind of conflict on that island, and I'm going to be a part of it. On the fridge top, the listening dragon shuddered. Everything I've gone through, the ice fire, the writing, Bergstrom, Gulana, is leading me toward that February day. The only thing I don't understand is Arthur. What part he has to play in all of this? I've told you everything I know, Liz said. What happened to him? Have any idea? None, she said, allowing Bonington up. You didn't try to contact him after? No, well... Okay, once, she sighed and looped her hair. I came to Wayward Crescent after Lucy was born. I was so busy with her for the first 6 months as any new mother would be, but in the quiet times when I was alone and she was sleeping, I'd think about Arthur and wonder if he was thinking of me. Gwilana had expressly forbidden any contact, but one day I caved in and tried to call him. There was no reply from his house, so I rang his department at the university. They told me he had left a few months before. Quit his career, disappeared without a trace. I never tried again. That's weird, David muttered. No, not really. He was a sensitive man, and he was clearly distraught, and I would rather not talk about this anymore, David. If you told me his last name, I might be able to... No! She said firmly, making Bonington twitch. You drop this, now. You're not going after him. Is that understood? She pointed down the hall. There's your room. I want you to see you using it. You come out for meals and use of the bathroom. You say you have a book to write. There you are. Write it. By Christmas, he completed 40,000 words. Following roughly the outline he'd given Dilys Wotton during their meeting a while before in New York, he began to shape a story of the Arctic and its history, centering on the period in the late 1960s when polar bears had been hunted to near extinction. It was not the story he expected to write, and he had absolutely no idea where it had come from. But throughout it, Gazooks showed no signs of apathy, and one afternoon even scribbled down the title, White Fire. David liked it. He ran it by Liz. It was spiritual, she said. What did Henry think? Since the onset of his writing, David had been a frequent visitor next door. Henry's study held a useful collection of books, many of them to do with polar exploration. Though skeptical at first of David's literary aspirations, Henry had nonetheless provided him with anything he needed for his research, including acquiring a few specialist books from the archives of the library in Scrubley, where he worked. In return, David kept his neighbour informed of progress, using the librarian's common sense reactions as a gauge to test twists and turns in the plot. The arrangement was working extremely well, until one day David walked into the study asking for a book about Inuit legends, and found himself met with a stony silence. "What's the matter?" he asked. "Henry, what's wrong?" Henry stiffened his shoulders. For once, all the bluster had gone right out of him. "Why did you not tell me about Susanna?" David sank down into a chair. The world caught up with him and shrieked to a halt. "Oh my God, I'm sorry. I'd forgotten how well you knew her." It was the truth, but it didn't ease the creeping sense of shame. All this time, and no one had bothered to tell Henry Bacon of Xana's quote-unquote disappearance. Now behind that granite exterior hid a shattered and slightly disturbed older man. "How did you find out?" That was David telling him. "How did you find out?" "Saw her library card was cancelled. Did some checking. What happened, boy?" I don't know," David said as sincerely as he could. "I was already home when I was told she was missing. I'm sorry, Henry. I am. You're right. I should have told you, but I'm still in shock myself." Henry grunted and flipped out a handkerchief. He ran it quickly under his nose. "No news of her?" "Nothing." "Gone then?" "Yes, there was a service." "I'm sorry, this is very difficult." Mr. Bacon nodded and stiffened his lip. "Liked you, didn't she?" "Yes, she did." "Got a dedication in mind for your book?" That pierced David right to the core. He shuffled his feet, barely knowing where to look. "Bright girl. Would have been proud of your efforts. Of course, I haven't read it yet. Might be useless." David laughed, but on the inside everything was crying. Only Henry, with his characteristic old-school bluntness, could have diffused a situation like that. He stood up, clutching the Inuit book. "Thanks for the loan." Henry pointed at the shelves. "Want to see yours there one day, boy." David nodded. "I'm working on it. I won't let you or Xana down." If such warmth from Henry was considered rare, the cordiality reached an astonishing peak a few weeks later when he invited the Pennycettle family plus Tennant to join him for a home-cooked pre-Christmas dinner. Date was December the 23rd. Liz was so flabbergasted she almost brought Gretel out of winter stasis to provide her with a dose of smelling salts. She changed into a stylish black dress, put on some earrings, and found some Belgian chocolates for a present. "Is this okay?" she asked David before they set out. "Too formal? Should I do something with my hair?" David, who thought he looked shabby by comparison, in corduroy jeans and a white linen shirt, made her do a twirl on the spot. "You look great," he said, and he meant it. He'd never really seen her dressed up before, and never even thought of her as a real woman. But here she was, his landlady, with wild red hair and flashing green eyes, and not a bad figure, though he tried not to look. She resembled Lucy so very much. Flawless skin, perfect mouth, beautiful in a childlike way. Was this what Guinevere had been like, he wondered? Wow. What a gene pool. No wonder the dragon Gawain had been charmed. Lucy, of course, could not be present. That had caused Liz a flutter or two and made her think twice about going at all. But with David's support she bravely rose above it and explained her daughter's absence by saying she was expected home the very next day, when Henry would be visiting relatives in Framingham, and would be gone again back to her Auntie Gwyneth's by the time he returned. Wasn't that a shame? Henry, who had never much cared for the company of children, took it as a kind of stoical mercy and invited them both to take places at his table. It was a good dinner. An extraordinary dinner. Henry had cooked a spectacular turkey, which he carved with such culinary expertise that the meat almost fell into supermarket-ready slices. He also concocted a homemade punch that he insisted could not make a goldfish dizzy, but had Liz giggling after one large glassful. As the afternoon wore on, Henry took orders for coffee and felt his way to the kitchen. While he was gone, David turned in his chair and cast his eye about the room. "What you after?" asked Liz, covering her mouth to stifle a bubble of returning punch. "Remote," said David. "It's Saturday. Want to check the soccer results." "You can't do that. You're a guest in someone's house." "I used to live here," David reminded her. "Henry won't mind. Besides—" "What's the matter?" Liz said, befuddled by the pause. He had stopped at the edge of the shaggy white rug as if he was suddenly afraid to cross it. "Something is happening," he said, putting out his hand. The air above the rug was rippling like a heat haze. Everything beyond it, the TV, the sideboard, was swimming away out of focus, as though his eyes were wrapped in a layer of polythene. Then something extraordinary happened. At rug level, a wicker basket pulsed into view. It was the one Liz had found when Lucy had been taken, the one that Snigger had been jailed in and released from. He was in it again, now gnawing at the corner, chewing through it, breaking out. This can't be right, David thought, his brain all at sea. But when he tried to say so, his voice was muted, as though he was caught in a waking nightmare. The air shimmered again, and suddenly he understood what was happening. He was seeing a replay of Lucy's abduction, or rather a second or two after that incident. The air movement was a rip in space, a rip that was fast resetting itself. But not fast enough to beat a nimble squirrel. Snigger leaped forward, and with a pop, as quiet as a soap bubble bursting, he completely disappeared. The wicker cage dissolved from view. The room returned to normal. David swept around. "Did you see that?" Liz was falling forward, holding her head. "I feel tired," she mumbled. "Brain's gone to sleep." "There was a disturbance," said David. "Some sort of time slip. I saw Snigger going through a kind of wormhole. I thought you told me you'd release him in the garden." He shook her to her senses. She blinked and said, "Snigger? Do you remember letting him go?" Her green eyes swam, but it wasn't her drink. "No," she said. "But you must. Where's the basket?" "Basket?" "The cage you found." She shook her head. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Black or white?" "Oh, sorry. "Black or white," said Henry, coming through with the tray. David answered for them. "Liz will have the black. Good and strong. I need to run back home for a moment." "Now? What's so urgent, boy?" "Thought I heard the phone ringing. Might have been Lucy." And he was gone before the first drop of coffee was poured. In the hallway, at number 42, Golly Gosh was fixing a set of Christmas lights. "Come with me," David told him, snapping his fingers. "I might need you to wake Gareth." Golly went Golly, who didn't think it was quite in order to bring a wishing dragon out of his winter stasis. "It's important," said David, going into his room. He crossed to the windowsill, where he found Gazooks pacing crossly back and forth. What's the matter, Suki? What is it?" Did you sense what happened next door just now?" He glanced at Gareth. The wisher hadn't moved a single scale. Gazooks gave a snort and turned his pad. Scrolled across, it was the word "far." My God, I keep pressing buttons. I'm so sorry. "Far what?" asked David. Zuki whipped his tail. He complained. "You were interrupted? This is only the start of a word?" Gazooks tapped his pencil hard against his teeth. "What stopped you?" The dragon slid his eyes towards Gareth. "The same force that's stopping him completing his mission. Went Gazooks, settling down in a heap. David looked into the dark night sky. Something's playing games with us, isn't it? He said. Something with the power to change the course of events. Something with its finger on the pulse of the universe. The question was, what? Christmas came, and although they agreed not to buy each other presents, David gave Liz a pair of amber earrings, green to match her eyes. She in turn gave him a sculpture, a sleek white polar bear. New line, she said sheepishly. Exclusive to you. Thought you'd like it. Something to keep your writing focused. It's great, he said. You have to name it, you know. Is it... I didn't use ice fire, no. It won't. David, just give it a name. Thoran, he said. The hero of my book. There was wisdom in his eyes, history in its pause, determination in the set of his jaw. If I could choose to reinvent myself, I'd be a bear like this. He stood up and gave her an enormous hug. Her body shuddered and he knew she was crying. Hey! What's the matter? Shh. I miss Lucy, she sobbed. I've never had a Christmas without her before. I know, he said quietly. I miss her as well. He ran a hand between her shoulder blades and knuckled her back. Xana too. He thought about the black feather under his pillow. Wherever you are, Merry Christmas, he wished her. Oh, David, what's going to happen? I don't know. She dropped her head deeper into his shoulder, her soft red hair creeping under his collar. It's all so strange. I never thought I'd fear Gawain, but I do. David closed his eyes, trying not to picture the dragon in his mind. Everything had been so quiet lately. But in 2 months' time, Bergstrom has plans. We'll find Lucy, I promise. She eased back, bouncing her fist off his chest. You're an idiot! You can't take on a dragon. People said the same about Guinevere once. She laughed through her tears and beat him again. Behind them, Bunnington's tail brushed the Christmas tree, making half the ornament shudder. Arthur used to call me his Guinevere, she said. The clock chimed softly. David raised a hand and moved the hair of her face. Who could possibly blame him, he said, and let her cry into his shoulder again. In the dictionary, there were over 200 words or phrases beginning far. None of them delivered any spark of understanding, but the mystery of that Christmas dinner remained. Though he checked the room carefully while Henry was away, David could find no evidence of a wormhole nor a single squirrel hair in the white tufts of the rug. But for 2 things he might have put it down to Henry's fruit punch. Liz had no memory of letting Snigger go, and the wicker basket was nowhere to be found. Mystified, he returned to his writing. The story unfolded, but it was different now. With every passing week, he felt an expectation growing, as though he was being carefully monitored. Not by anything he could name or see, but by the aura of the universe, pressing in around him. Dark matter. It moved with his fingers as they hurried across the keyboard, and he sensed it shadowing his every thought. Xana drawing within range of the tooth, Ingavar already prowling the eye. Oh, sorry. Jesus Christ, I just skipped 2 sentences here. And he sensed it shadowing his every thought. Xana, drawing within range of the tooth. Ingavar already prowling the ice. Grockle out there seeking his fire. Lucy dreaming of a girl by a stream. Bergstrom and his talisman readying for battle. Guilana in a damp cave waiting and plotting. In the sky above them all, a firestar coming. The book, White Fire, drew to a conclusion. With it, the weather began to improve. Cold bright sunshine, tangible rain, colors came alive through the windows again. Dragons awoke. Gretel first, hurrying Gruffin and others along. Gareth, still nursing the rejuvenating Fane, remained on the windowsill, taking his time. From its high point on the fridge, the listening dragon broke all the winter news. The house breathed. The calendar turned. The month of February arrived. David paced his room, ever more anxious that his time was approaching, wondering why Bergstrom hadn't been in touch. On his desk lay almost 300 sheets of paper. His part of the bargain, the story, delivered. Twice he called the Polar Research Base, only to hear the boring answering machine. He thought back to his parting with Bergstrom at the college. "When we move quickly," the scientist had said. David checked the calendar. February the 9th. Talk about cutting it close. It was February the 11th, mid-morning, when it all changed. David was in the front room cradling Bonington. The cat was dying, in progressively slower stages. Sleep had replaced all forms of activity. Any pursuit now was in the cat's dreams. "Why can't you help him?" David asked Golly. The healer was sitting on the arm of the sofa. Lately, he had kept a much closer vigil. Gretel, too, was never far away, sweeping the air with soothing lavender. Gareth was on the coffee table, looking on. Golly whispered, so as not to wake the cat. Bonington was paws up, snoring peacefully, making small wet bubbles on his pink-tipped nose. "How can you say it's all right?" David said, wiping a dribble from Bonington's mouth. "He's dying, Golly. He's going away." Behind the gum he could see the swelling, raising the tongue. But the healing dragon had nothing to add. He simply folded his wings, blew a faint wisp of smoke, and fixed his big blue eyes on the cat. David sighed and lifted Bonington's paw, slipping back through his memories of their time together. He was wondering if Bonington was doing the same, revisiting ridge tiles, fences, walls, his treasure trove at the bottom of the garden, his basket in the kitchen, David's blanket, when all of a sudden the atmosphere shifted and the dragon stirred. "What was that?" David said, laying Bonington on the sofa. He was about to stand up when he felt a slight tingling sensation in his hand and a rather strange clearing calm in his head. "I am Fane," said a voice from the center of the calm. "Shall we commingle?" "If you like," said David, thinking rather than saying the words. It was a tentative offer, for he no longer felt quite part of the room, and everything in it was tinted blue. Besides, if the thing was inside him already, he didn't seem to have a lot of choice. "You have a high vibration," said the Fane. "You attract." "Attract what?" said David. "Everything," it said. "The universe moves within you and without you." David shook his head. "Do not wobble," said the Fane. The room swam violet. "Sorry, but I don't understand you," said David. "You have connections," it said, "to Goddess." "You mean through Gazooks? And Golly and Gareth?" "More," said the Fane. "You are one with Arthur." David sat forward, concentrating hard. "What do you know about Arthur?" he asked. "He is becoming like us, like Fane." "Changing things by the power of thought?" "Arthur is reaching out," it said. "How can I find him?" "You already have." The mailbox rattled, making David jump. Instantly, the Fane disconnected from his Oma and returned to its favorite host, Gareth. Seconds later, Gazooks landed breathless on the sofa. He dropped a small white envelope at David's knee. It was addressed to David, in shaky green writing. 42 Wayward Crescent, Scrupley. By airmail, postmarked Scotland, UK. David tore it open as Liz walked in. "This came," he said, a folded sheet of paper. Gretel snatched the envelope and pulled at the ink. "Hey, what the—" David tried to snatch it back, but she hurried aggressively and flapped away. Gazooks, meanwhile, was growing more and more agitated. "He wants to see it," said Liz, nodding at the note. David, still wondering what the Fane had meant about Arthur, slowly opened it. 2 words in the same green ink. Farlow Island. Went the writing dragon, beating his wings. Hi, Ashen. You're supposed to be doing your duties. But thank you for subscribing for 41 months. Jesus Christ, dude. I thought that was longer. Oh, it doesn't matter. Liz knelt and cupped her hands around his body. What's the matter with him? What does it mean, that note? David chewed his lip, his eyes darting back and forth. At Christmas he tried to write a message beginning far. Something stopped him before he could finish. I bet my last chestnut this was what he had in mind. But who sent this? She said, taking it from him, fighting to keep it out of Gretel's clutches. Don't know, David muttered, going over to the shelf where Liz kept a number of reference books, among them an atlas. He flipped it open at the British Isles. There, he breathed excitedly. There, it exists. He showed Liz the map. Farlow, it's one of the Scottish islands. I've heard of it, she said. It's a holy place owned by monks. It's famous because it's shaped like a cross. Monks, David muttered, tapping the map against his chin. Monks. Wait, that must be it! He snapped his fingers and looked Liz in the eye. Where do people who drop out of society go? I think that this is the final chapter of part 2, but it is. It actually is. Where do people who drop out of society go? Before she can answer, Gretel was tugging at the letter again. This time David caught her and turned her to face him. This ink, what is it? Gretel's eyes grew wild. What is it? She repeated, this time in dragon tongue. Blood, she heard. Dragons? She nodded. A rippling ran through the house. I have to go, said David, snatching up his jacket. I can book a flight over the net. Flight? Flight where? Said Liz. Go where? To Britain. To Farlow. To him. Arthur is there, Liz. I think he's found what Bergstrom needs. David! Slow down! She hauled him back. This doesn't make any sense. Even if it was Arthur, why would he write to you? He doesn't even know you exist. I think he does. I think he's been sending me clues all along. Liz glanced at Gazooks. Yes, via him. Zuki didn't write Arthur's name for nothing. He's a physicist, Liz. A man who loves stars and the stuff of space. I think he knows about something called dark matter and how to control it. Us included. He's on that island, and that's where I'm heading. But why would he send you this letter, she said, anxiety running right through her voice. David paused to think. Why does anyone light a beacon? You think he's in trouble? I just know I have to find him. And without another word, he dashed out of the room. Bam! Part 3. We finished part 2. Oh my goodness, we're really close to ending this book, but we still have part 3 to read and part 4. Oh my gosh. Okay. We're at part 3 now. Also, this book that I'm holding is quite old as well. Well, old, quote unquote old. Either printed in 2008, 2005, or 2007. I don't remember. But it has yellow pages, so it has its age. Okay, there's part 4. Oh, wow, okay, part 4 is very tiny. What in the world? Okay, marker is... What's the marker on the time? It's 13:54, so basically 14 hours in. 14 hours in for part 3 of the book, Firestar. Rightio. Part 3. Farlow Abbey, 10 days earlier. Enter! The door swung slowly back, and the tall, stooping figure of Brother Vincent stepped into Abbot Hugo's office. The abbot was sitting with his back to the door on a dark oak pew with a fleur-de-lis pattern cut into the backrest. There was no movement in the fabric of his robe, but his head was not bowed, and he was clearly not at prayer. All the same, Brother Vincent did not approach. Humility and rank forbade such arrogance. Instead, he clasped his hands together and waited, muttering on a downward slant. "You wish to speak with me, Abbot?" "Yes, close the door." With a nod of his tonsured head, Brother Vincent pushed the door until it clicked against the keeper. The sound echoed madly in the hollows of his chest, beating at the fear he felt rising there. Doors in the abbey were rarely closed to demonstrate trust and openness. And though speech was not forbidden within the order, it was usually restricted to arranged times and emergencies. To be summoned, thus, meant all was not well. "Come and sit beside me, brother." Vincent shuffled across the floor, his sandals barely raising a sound from the boards. Although the island was deep in the last throes of winter, the modern heating system at work in the abbey meant there was no need for shoes indoors. He joined the abbot on the three-seater pew, resting his hands in the hollow of his lap, and fixing his gaze through the wide arch window across the green acres of pasture land that ran away eventually down to the sea. Hugo took off his weary brown spectacles. From somewhere deep within his bushy white beard, his lips produced a stream of warm, wet air. The small round lenses of the spectacles clouded. Using a fold of his habit as a duster, he wiped them clear before looping them back around his ears. On a table at his side lay a small wooden box. From it he took out a folded piece of paper. It crackled drily as he opened it out. "This was on the floor of the chapel," he said, disapproval evident in the jut of his chin. "There is no identifying mark, but it was found in the spot where you are known to kneel." He ran a myopic eye across it. "Is it yours, brother?" Calculations, vectors, stellar trajectories, the final approach path of the star. Brother Vincent tried not to seem ruffled, but the gulp in his throat as he swallowed his guilt must have sounded like a cannon shot. Abbot Hugo was a watchful, perceptive man. He knew the answer to his question already. What he was seeking here was admission. "Before I joined the Brethren," Vincent said, "I had a substantial interest in astronomy. God's hand was never more at work than in the stars. Sometimes their movement lure me still." Abbot Hugo sucked in through his nose. It was deeply indented and hooked like a beak. His presence about the abbey could always be detected from the sound of his pinched headmasterly breathing. He pressed his thumbs together till the skin turned white. I know the contents of our library very well. I have never seen any book in there relating to astronomical procedures, or any kind of ephemeris giving planetary positions. You have no telescope in your cell, and yet you are able to write and draw figures which suggest you have computed something of great importance in the heavens. What do you have to say about that?" Rain slanted into the windows, strumming jazzily against the glass. Brother Vincent closed his eyes, time and space peeling back through his mind. It had been raining that autumn evening. On the bridge above the river he had seen a comet arcing brightly across the sky. In that place where her hand had first reached for his. Then, and where he had tried to say his last goodbye. The pattern of that night was embroidered on his memory. White fires burning in the sea of his grief. What need did he have of books and ephemeris? What could he say that the abbot would understand? How was it possible to speak of his loss to an old man dressed in a stone-coloured cloth who had never loved anyone other than his God? Abbot Hugo coughed into his fist. "You must understand why I must ask you this." Brother Vincent lowered his head. "If you have no access to scientific data, then it must be assumed you are using the stars to give weight to prediction. The penalty for any act of divination would be instant instant exclusion from the order. No! Vincent leaped up straight, rocking the pew's uneven feet. He slid to his knees and gripped the abbot's robe. Don't send me from the island, please. I beg you. He placed his forehead against the abbot's knees, eyes plumping behind his spectacles. Abbot Hugo placed a hand on the younger man's shoulder, pushing him away to a comfortable distance. Are there more of these papers? Yes, Abbot, yes. You must show them to me. They may have to be destroyed. Vincent pressed his hands to his face. You spend a great deal of time at the Folly. Is that where most of this writing is kept? The Folly. A grey stone tower to the north of the island. A place of meditation. A place of secrets. Brother Vincent drew back into himself. I go to the Folly in search of peace. All the writings are in my cell, in my drawer, in my escritoire. I think there's a French word. Escritoire. The abbot touched his beard as he pondered his reply. His gaze flickered briefly to a curtained-off enclosure, returning quickly as Vincent looked up. Gather them and bring them here, tonight. Speak to no one of this. Go now. I will pray for you. Thank you, Abbot. Vincent rose up humbly and headed for the door. Oh, Brother Vincent. Yes? Abbot Hugo was now tipped slightly forward, his hands squeezed together under his chin, the chain of a crucifix trailing from them. The ink on the paper. It's a most unusual color. In a certain light, it seems to glow green. Brother Vincent allowed himself to swallow again, confident this time that he was too far away for his fear to be detected. I dilute the ink with alcohol, he said. Alcohol? From the perfumes, he added, thankful that God had guided his eyes toward a row of bottled scents on the abbot's shelf. The island was sustained by its sales of dried herbs, candy, and colognes. Brother Vincent, with a history of science in his background, was one of the accomplished members of the order. I was writing down a recipe for Brother Malcolm, and the ink and the alcohol ran together. I liked the color. I found it soothing. Intriguing, said the abbot. Peace be with you, brother. And you, my lord abbot, Vincent said quietly. With a courteous nod, he backed out of the room. The rain lashed the windows again, masking the sound of a curtain swishing back. Well, said Hugo to the monk who came to join him. His name was Brother Bernard Augustus. He was short and his legs were bruised at the ankles. His face was round with kindness and concern. His soul is aching. His voice betrays it. He's hiding something, the abbot said quietly. Brother Bernard spread his fingers, touching their pudgy ends to the window. I fear for him. The history of this island is dark. Then find out what he's keeping from us. You wish me to follow him? To spy on my brother? A bell clanged, low and rich with persuasion. The abbot parted his hands. 11 years ago, before he came to the Brethren, Brother Vincent tried to end his life by throwing himself off a bridge into a river. No one has ever found out why. That torment is rising in his eyes again. Something evil is preying on his heart. All I want to do is protect him, Brother Bernard. All I want to do is understand. In the fields next day. Brother Vincent! The voice came calling out from some way behind him. Turning, he saw the stumpy figure of Brother Bernard Augustus hurrying along the flattened grass track. They were halfway between the monastery chapel and the folly at the northern tip of the island. A knot of uncertainty rolled into the center of Vincent's chest. He had never been followed out here before. Red-faced from the hurry, Bernard came puffing up, resembling a small, very overweight puppy. Wisps of ginger hair from his freckled head were falling forward, sticking to his brow. A brittle, wintry rain was in the air, and the grass underfoot was slippery and muddied. But he had neither changed his sandals nor raised his cowl. Brother Vincent bit his tongue in silent reproach. Direct exposure to the harshest elements was one form of penitence he had not yet considered. He shook his head, chiding himself for such scorn. Even now, after all these years on the island, the monastic principles did not always sit comfortably with him. Brother Bernard, what brings you chasing me here? Bernard, patting his brow with a handkerchief, he puffed his chest and blew a round breath of air. He solidified into a large ball of mist. What a glory it is to be out in the wilds, even in the bleakness of a February morning. Vincent bowed. That he could not agree with. Isolation was a route to inner peace, but his mind just then was anything but still. What did this winded brother want? Bernard opened his chunky hands. His smile was almost as wide as his reach. I'm sure you remember that ornithology is an amateur pastime of mine. I was merely wondering where that was nesting. He pointed beyond. Brother Vincent turned to see a large black bird skitter down from the sky and land just a yard or two away. It strutted a few steps and pecked the earth, and then threw back its head and shrieked at the men. Fascinating, don't you think? Bernard said, wiping the handkerchief hard across his mouth. It's a crow, said Vincent. His heart was thumping, but his voice was even. Beneath the fold of his habit, his bare knees seemed to have welded together. He blinked as a snowflake landed on his eyelid. Why would it be of particular interest? Ah! Bernard rubbed his hands together as though he was attempting to spark a fire. At the risk of sounding overly precocious, I must correct you, Brother Vincent. I believe that is a raven, not a crow. It has a fan-shaped tail and a beak more rounded than its smaller cousin. Its presence here is most beguiling. Vincent dragged his gaze away from the bird. Why is that? Bernard's eyebrows hopped and he smiled again. Because we've never had a single raven here before. He brushed past the sand a little closer to the bird. It dipped its beak and stared back fearlessly. With an elegant ruffle of its flint-black feathers, it put its wings into the wind and was carried away north. Bernard twisted, cupping his eyes. Magnificent, he breathed. I first saw it on the roof of the chapel. That was just over a week ago. This morning I observed it again through my binoculars. It was circling the folly of all places. I know you like to spend time out here, or out there. I was wondering if you had seen it, brother, or could possibly tell me if there is a pair. Brother Vincent drove his hands into his wide, loose sleeves and continued his measured walk along the path. You must forgive me. While my heart contains joy for all God's creatures, during prayer my eyes are trained only within. I know nothing of this bird. Peace be with you. Good day. Brother, wait! In a matter of clumping strides, Bernard was back at the other man's side. If you have no objection, I would like to join you at the folly today and hopefully answer my question myself. In the distance, a soft wave landed, spilling its hollow yawn into the caverns cored out of the island by the motions of the sea. Brother Vincent paused and rolled his shoulders. The folly is not a place of comfort, brother. I have provisions, Bernard interjected cheerily. He patted a knapsack strapped across his shoulder. Cheese, bread, and a flagon of water. Vincent looked to one side. Forgive me, I have been too presumptuous, Bernard said, clasping his hands together and bowing. Snowflakes fell across the yoke of his shoulders, patterning his brown, slightly threadbare cowl. I have no wish to disturb your meditations. I will walk the coast path and observe the bird from there. No, said Vincent, recovering quickly. The island retreats are there for all. It will be a pleasure to share bread with you at the folly. Excuse me if I seemed anything less than grateful for your offer. Come, let me guide you. I know a route less likely to wet the toes. Brother Bernard nodded graciously and fell into step. For a few strides they walked on in silence. Then it was the taller monk who spoke again. May I ask you a question about this bird? You seem excited yet puzzled by the presence of it. Indeed, said Bernard, his heavy feet slapping against the grass, spraying his companion's ankles with water. Members of the Corvidae tend to cluster. Why one should choose to cross 8 miles of water and settle here is a mystery after all, brother. Perhaps something attracted it, Vincent said quietly. Other than your excellent recipes for chocolate, I cannot think what. Though I did read an article the other day which the ignorant and misguided might argue was the cause. It was to do with of all things spiritual awareness. Brother Vincent felt a shudder topple off his shoulders and leave an ice-cold trail down his arms. To know God is something oh my God, I cannot speak. We strive for every day. Why be so dismissive, brother? The subject matter was monkeys, said Bernard. The leader came to a sudden halt. Monkeys? On a group of South Sea islands. Vincent shook his head in puzzlement, throwing off his cowl. The cold wind immediately punished his ears. He flipped up the cover and continued walking. It was a scientific study, Bernard said, which set out to determine if the monkeys were able to solve a simple problem. Sweet potatoes were left on a sandy beach for them. The monkeys found them and sensed they were good to eat, but were put off because they were covered in sand. Then one day a wise old monkey on the remotest island of the chain washed her potato in the sea and ate it. Monkeys nearby quickly learned to follow suit until most of them were cleansing their food in that way. Then something extraordinary appeared to happen. When the number of monkeys exhibited such behavior reached 100, monkeys on islands miles away suddenly began washing their potatoes as well, even though they had no contact with the original troop. The author of the piece proposed a preposterous explanation. Vincent cut in and said without a pause that the skill had been attained by enough members of the group to form a critical mass so that awareness of the skill was then transferred to every monkey through their group consciousness. Precisely, Brother Bernard exclaimed. You astound me, brother. How did you guess? They were at the base of the folly. Brother Vincent unlatched the door and bade his fellow monk follow him in. There was nothing on this level but a winding staircase and a dampness leaking from the circular walls. As his foot found the first worn hollow in the stone, Brother Vincent said, there is a theory called the law of attraction, which proposes that whatever we think about, we bring to us. Whatever we desire, we create. Brother Bernard Augustus lifted his habit and trod his way carefully up the stairs. A law, Brother Vincent? Surely the only law of creativity is that which the Lord himself commands. Would it not be the greatest of profanities for you or I to think we could... Shh! What was that? As he climbed through the hatch to the next floor of the folly, something had scuttled across the wooden boards. Brother Bernard closed his hands in prayer. Are there rats here? Forgive me. I do not like rats. Only one, said Vincent. He dropped down on one knee and opened his hand. A small lithe figure jumped onto his palm, ran the length of his arm and vanished behind his neck. This is my companion, he said. Quite tame. When he turned, there was a grey squirrel sitting on his shoulder. Brother Bernard stared in astonishment. As in the case of the single raven, he had never seen a squirrel on the island before, and certainly not one that smiled. Oh, my goodness. My goodness. My goodness. We're really getting close to the ending of this book. Right, the next chapter, Prayers in the Folly. On the first floor of the folly was a lectern as old as the abbey itself. It faced a broken window which looked out onto the open sea. Gulls and sometimes fishing boats crossed by, but for the most part there was only water and sky. It was here that Brother Bernard leaned a forearm. The desk was often used for a standing prayer, and he found himself muttering a biblical passage, hoping it might explain this apparition now cheering softly into Brother Vincent's ear. "I do not understand this," he said, somewhat flushed. Out came his sweat-cloaked handkerchief again. "How can squirrels and ravens arrive on the island when they have never been present before?" He watched Brother Vincent feed a peanut to the squirrel. It shelled it in seconds and chirped for another. "Perhaps tourists," he added, gesturing hopefully. "There were many every year, but not through the winter." He pulled his hands tight together again, troubled. "You should rest," Vincent said. "The walk here saps the strength from the knees." He drew up the only chair in the room and sat Brother Bernard with his back to the window and the rustling sea. Bernard slipped his knapsack of provisions to the floor, noticing something by the foot of the lectern. A crunched-up piece of paper. He reached for it, only to find his arm gripped by the wrist. "Allow me," Brother Vincent said. A weak light bounced off his glassy blue eyes. He picked up the paper and squeezed it in his fist. Brother Bernard sank back, bristling nervously. Glancing around, he could see other balls of paper. Evidence that Vincent had been lying at the abbey. Oh, why had Abbot Hugo given him this task? There was nothing spiritual about distrust. "You seem anxious. Is something on your mind, Brother Bernard?" The chair creaked as Bernard shifted his weight. He prayed quickly for guidance and made a bold decision. "Brother, the abbot is concerned for your welfare. He fears you are fighting demons in your mind and has asked me to watch over you. I am not altogether at ease with his requests. I don't know what to do." Brother Vincent walked to the window and guided the squirrel onto the ledge. "You must do what the Lord dictates," he said, "and follow the path of righteousness. I see questions in your eyes, worry in your movements. What is it you wish to know?" Brother Bernard ran a hand across his gleaming crown. "These papers, what are they? There, it's out." "Mistakes," said Vincent. "Unforeseen errors. Passages I'm not quite comfortable with." "Passages?" "For the past few months I've been writing a story. Here, at the lectern." He patted it as though it was a faithful friend. "A work of fiction?" "I thought so, once." There was a tremor in Vincent's voice. He ran his little finger down the squirrel's back. It darted up It darted up his arm again, back onto his shoulder. "Let me guess," he said, stepping forward. "Abbot Hugo has told you I tried to take my life. He would like to know why, in case I try again. If I tell you the circumstances, will you swear to me you will not speak of my story till after I am gone?" "You're leaving the order?" "Shortly, yes." Bernard let his arms fall loosely at his side. "So many surprises." "There are more," said Vincent. He dropped the ball of paper into Bernard's lap. Look at it, please." Bernard smoothed it out. It was 3/4 filled with the same green ink that he had seen on Vincent's sketches of the heavens. What will I learn from this?" he asked. He glanced at the page and saw the word dragon. Immediately his warm heart cooled. "Many years ago I knew a woman," Vincent said. "I was in love with her, she with me, or so I thought. One day I discovered she had mothered a child that could not have been mine. I was devastated and threw myself into a river. I was rescued and taken to a hospital. When I recovered, I chose to find spiritual sanctuary here. In the past few months I have." "But this?" Bernard passed a hand across the page. "That is my catharsis," Vincent said. "My explanation for the birth. It exonerates her virtue and keeps our love alive." Bernard blinked in confusion. He looked again at the word dragon. "Liz," he muttered, finding a name. "Elizabeth, that was she." "And this explains her infidelity?" "There was no infidelity," Vincent insisted. "No other man involved." "Then who was the father?" Vincent looked away. Bernard slowly folded the paper. Brother, you have been my companion for 10 years now. In all that time you have never once stepped off this island. How can you know what you cannot know, or convince yourself of a truth just imagined? Vincent pushed his tongue between his tightening lips. He stepped backward and turned to the wall. There was a grating sound of stone against stone. When he turned back to the light again, there was something in his hands. It was long and curved, with a sharply pointed tip. "What is that?" Bernard said, fear rising in his throat. The myths about this island seemed suddenly very real. Vincent held the artifact as though it were a pen. "This is a dragon's claw," he breathed.